The rights of citizens have been a subject of discussion over the last few weeks, and this probably inspired by a visit by a UN Special Envoy. But last week, there were two by-elections at parliamentary level held, and one of the interesting outcomes is none of the political parties participating fielded in a female candidate. NGOCC has been weighing in on this, and this is why we talked to the Executive Director of the NGOCC, Anamela, who talks to us about why this is happening and how this narrative can be changed. Welcome to this day. My name is Dingendaba Jonah Buyoya. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of This Day. Let's start off first of all with just dating it back to the UN Special Rapporteur who was in the country and highlighted quite an interesting angle to all of the issues around human rights. And she says legal mechanisms are being used to target opposition figures, journalists and activists. Has the NGOCC observed any patterns of selective prosecution?
Thank you very much, Jonah. I think first, ideally, we should all agree that legal mechanisms should be blind of who they prosecute and must be fair. So they should be applied fairly without considering the standing or the affiliation of that person in society. We have observed actually some persecutions which, in our opinion, seem to be skewed towards opposition more than ruling party. I mean, one that comes in mind is the one of Mumbipiri's arrest after being charged with aggravated robbery. At the time, a statement around this where we expressed our concerns because we just felt that even the charge itself seemed a bit overboard. And I think we were vindicated by the Director of Public Prosecution, which also showed that, which was good in a way because it showed that the system was able to check itself and do the correct thing, and we commend them for that. But I think when we have arrests like that, it brings to question the balance and the fairness, especially when we see the type of charges that are being conferred on someone in a situation that was highly, highly volatile. And there were a lot of other why this particular incident was singled out. And that's where the issue of fairness comes in. And the perception that maybe some of the prosecutions may be selective.
So many are saying that the right to freedom of opinion and expression in Zambia is being violated by key state institutions. We know that the UPND in 2021 promised to follow through on its commitments to protect fundamental freedoms. Do you think that the UPND has upheld this promise?
In what they say, they seem to uphold the promise. And I think, to be fair, there is more freedom of expression than there is not. However, I mean, we still are cognizant of the fact that, expressing our freedoms should be done responsibly. So where freedoms are expressed and for instance, genuinely and from international accepted standards and from within the confines of our law, those expressions might put the country or certain groups at, in danger, then the state should be allowed to use the state institutions fairly in that regard. But where we see that these are being used in ways, that infringe on fundamental freedoms, then that cannot be accepted, because we should express our freedom in the way that the Constitution allows us. And for us as women, one of the things that we've seen for a long time is how many women are being bullied online, for instance, and that is all in the guise of freedom of expression, and really that shouldn't be allowed. So, and then also what we note is that sometimes government is quite sensitive to receiving perceptions and opinions of the citizens when they shouldn't be, because they should be ready to receive the perceptions and perspectives of citizens, as long as those perceptions and perspectives do not infringe, for instance, on the security of the country. People should be allowed to express themselves. And when they were in opposition, this is one of the things that they suffered from as well. And we expected that when they would come in, you know, they would be very, very open to encouraging expression, you know, freedom of expression, and be open to receiving whatever opinions and perspectives people have out there, including around their governance. If people think things are going wrong, they should be allowed to speak without any fear of intimidation or of the law coming to get them.
Do you think that the digital space has made it easier for people to express themselves, or would you argue that it is still complicated, if I may use that expression?
It's certainly made it easier for people to express themselves. I mean, even just the fact that, you know, the digital space is so far-reaching, and then the digital space, I mean, you're able to access that from wherever you are. Even here, I mean, I can access the digital space. So that has made it much, much easier for people to access audiences and to be able to express their views to whatever audiences they're targeting. But then this should be done responsibly. For example, many women are shying away from standing for political office or any public office because of cyberbullying. You know, the abuse online is terrible, and you know, women are being objectified rather than look at the substance of what a woman represents. Then they're rather objectified as women, and that's because, you know, the cyberspace is open. So we really would like to have proper cyber laws, but as long as those cyber laws do not infringe on the human rights of those that need to express themselves.
While that may be the case, there's also the argument that the digital space is becoming harder and harder for people to express themselves because of the laws that surround this part of our daily lives, the legal framework around cyber security and the cyber laws. What is your assessment of this aspect of freedom of expression?
I think there's been a fear. I mean, we're just coming out of this legal case of the young man, why me? So, and then there are other examples we could give. So if you see people, you know, these laws being used against people when they express themselves, and the person can spend time in you know, incarcerated for so long, and then at the end of it, more or less walk free. I mean, it does drive fear into people, and that should not be the case. People must be free to express themselves, and it shouldn't be around the how. It should be the what. As I said, if it really poses a security concern or some other concern to the country, that is one thing. But it shouldn't be used in a manner that you know, makes people feel like, you know, anything that they say they may be censored, they may be arrested, they may, you know, they may face several repercussions. It's very important that indeed we should have some laws that you know, put a check on what is happening, especially in the cyberspace. We now have the cyber security and cyber crimes bills, and we as NGOCC have actually opposed some of the provisions in those bills, because we don't expect that these, while being good for the, you know, they may have a good for the society, they may be, you know, very good in ensuring that there's order and that there's protection of individuals, of the state, of firms and all. But then fundamental rights must be respected, and people must not be threatened with laws that will be so punitive that in the end they can't even express themselves.
To what extent do you as civil society believe that government is receptive of your feedback? Because there's also been the perception that under the UPND, government, civil society have not openly been speaking, they've not been speaking enough, and the idea is that perhaps they're being gagged.
Okay, I think I'll answer that in two ways. I'll give an example of the cyber crimes and cyber security laws, and maybe even of the NGO bill. These bills were to be taken before cabinet and then would have gone to parliament. But when we as NGOs expressed concern around some of the provisions in those bills, the process was stopped to allow dialogue. And that dialogue even included dialogue at the highest level with the head of state. We were called, in there to express our views. Very, very clearly we did that, even giving very clear submissions around what we agreed with, what we didn't agree with, and why. Then after meetings like that, you expect certain movement. So when that doesn't happen, sometimes you begin to wonder, is this being done to appease us for a while? Or is this engagement genuine? Because we need to see the outcome. The first outcome we see is that the process is stopped. And that is good, because then it seems you are open to listening to what civil society has done. But after that, it's ensuring that after it's stopped and agreements that have been made around perhaps making amendments or trying to create more acceptable laws, through consultative processes, we want to see that happen. We want to see the results of those engagements. And in terms of civil society being cowed into not speaking, I don't think we have been cowed into not speaking. It's just that we see maybe that there seems to be more openness maybe to engage with civil society. However, as I said, we should still see that engagement leads to some very, very clear outcomes as agreed, when we engage. And that's when we're going to say that this openness is a real openness to engage and to act on what is agreed. It shouldn't just be an openness to show that there's an openness or to stop civil society from expressing themselves in certain ways, but it should be an openness that is genuinely so for seeing the resolution of whatever matters, there may be contention about.
Let's talk about the media. How would you describe state-owned media and its remaining aligned with the ruling party? Many are saying that this has affected balanced political coverage.
I think our assessment is that it is true. State-owned media usually affects balanced coverage. State-owned, if you compare it even to the other private media houses that we have, you'll find that state-owned media tends to cover the ruling party more than it does others, and it tends to portray the ruling party in more positive light, and would be very happy, to highlight the negatives from the opposition. The fact that it is state-owned does not mean that it should be skewed to the ruling party, because it is still taxpayers' money that sustains the state media houses. Therefore, they should be balanced. I know that they've been used. Time immemorial in Zambia, state-owned media has been used to align and has aligned with the ruling party, has been used to get messages across around the ruling party positively. But it should be balanced, because it is the fact that it's state-owned doesn't mean that it's for the ruling party or it's for government use only for their benefit. It should be for the benefit of the citizens, because after all, as I said, it's taxpayers' money. And most of our citizens, that is the media they have access to. So it should be balanced.
With all of the things that you've said, how do we make sure that we compel state-owned media to be balanced and to be professional at the least?
I think we can only do that if these media houses become independent financially. For as long as they depend on government funding, they will always be aligned to the government. That's a given. And then also, I think it's also in the way that the boards are appointed for these media houses. They're appointed by the state. And when they're appointed by the states, the expectation is, of course, that you will follow what your appointing authorities want you to do. So if there was a way maybe of appointing boards publicly, you have you have the public proposing names, and then you have public interviews like we've seen for some positions in South Africa. Maybe even for some of the commissions in South Africa, like to be appointed to maybe a gender commission or a human rights commission, you have to go through scrutiny. And when I talk about the public, I'm not talking about public institutions. I'm talking about people, the Zambians. So I think it's about the resourcing of these houses. As long as resources are government and they don't stand independently, they'll have to toe the line. And two, as long as even the oversight structures are appointed by the same authorities, government, then they too have to toe the line.
Let us talk about the legal and constitutional reforms to safeguard democracy. As a leading civil society organization, how is the NGOCC working to ensure that government follows through with its commitments?
The one thing about democracy is the issue of inclusion, the issue of equal participation, the issues of open spaces to engage and to express ourselves, as we've spoken about. One of the issues that we have as NGOCC is the participation of women in the democratic processes. And maybe I could take an example of the political elected offices. At the moment, I think everybody knows that we only have about 14% of women parliamentarians. And even when it comes to appointed positions, we have 4 women in cabinet out of 25 seats. At local government, the percentage also is about 15% of women out of the all local government positions. So what it means is that our current electoral system is not working to ensure that there's a balance, between the numbers of men and women. So what we are doing as NGOCC is proposing a proportional representational system that will ensure that we begin to move towards that balance in the same way that other countries have done that in the past, because we're not yet there. And then we still have patriarchal systems, patriarchal beliefs that still, make it difficult for women to participate in the way they should. So what we need is affirmative action, even around electoral processes that, build onto, build our democratic processes in Zambia. So we have provisions in our constitution, for instance, around ensuring 50-50 participation. But as long as some of the subsidiary laws are not implemented fully, or some are inadequate to make sure that that happens, then it won't. For example, we need a political parties law that would compel them to nominate women at a 50-50 in a 50-50% way, so that then there's equal opportunities for both women and men to participate when we have elections. But without that, without any law that compels certain actions, Zambia may still be a long way in seeing gender parity, especially in participating in democratic processes. We now have the CDF also, which is a good thing, but we have, from our own anecdotal evidence, listening to our women out there, realize that in some of the CDF committees, for example, you have more men than women. Therefore, the women's voices are not as strong as they should be. And then we have women still experiencing certain challenges around accessing CDF for various reasons. So, but then also commending government for the fact that they have made some resources, available for women in particular and the youth. But when it comes to participation of women, girls, and persons with disability, I think we still need stronger affirmative action that will make sure that we level the playing field. And there are many issues, even the cost of elections, women are not as economically empowered. So there are many issues, but affirmative action is required, and political will to make sure that affirmative action work is very important.
Do you believe that the UPND administration has got this commitment towards dealing with these issues, or do you see a pattern of delay tactics?
Well, we heard a commitment, or we heard the head of state at the last International Women's Day ceremony saying that he would be open and would love to see some form of legal reform that would move us towards more equitable participation in politics. We have, as NGOCC, together with other civil society organizations, have had meetings with the head of state where we have made very, very specific proposals around what changes we can make between now and the next election. So if the will is there, then we should see movement in that area. We are now just months away from just over a year away from the next election. So if we don't see any movement now, we might miss an opportunity. So the verbal commitment and the verbal desire to ensure that there's more equitable participation was made by the head of state, but now we want to see concrete actions happening. We've also been engaging parliamentarians and we'll continue to engage parliamentarians to see how we can move towards more equitable democratic processes and spaces in this country. And as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Pronouncements have been made. Let's see action.
Well, let me get towards the conclusion of our interview. I mean, a few days ago, we witnessed the Patriarchy Central and Pambashe by-elections. What do you make of the failure by the political parties that were participating to sponsor female candidates in either one of the by-elections?
That is an indication of the continued existing patriarchal tendencies in Zambia. Because really, if political parties, knowing already the situation in parliament around the participation of women as parliamentarians, they should be making deliberate efforts to increase those numbers by ensuring that they are nominating women. Because that would, even two would make a difference. But if even with that knowledge around the challenges of women's participation, and even with the knowledge, some of them even know when they're going into an election that this one, for sure, we will win. And if you know that you're going to win for sure because it's an area where you have support, put in a woman, and that will increase the numbers. So for us, it shows that nothing really has changed around, the desire to ensure that these numbers are becoming more balanced. Because if people were concerned about that, they would ensure that they're, nominating more women to take up, these positions. And as I said, something needs to be in place to compel even political parties to do that. And maybe that should be a law. But the law must be compelling enough. It shouldn't leave it to the whims of individual leaders. And that must also start from the leadership in the political parties. For as long as the leadership within political parties is skewed to men, then we'll have men making decisions that are good for men and not for women.
Finally, in this interview, I'd like to drive your attention to the report by the Zambia Police Service and get your sentiments towards the 24% reduction in GBV cases for Q4 of 2024, as reported by the police.
Was it a 24% deduction? For us, I think we saw a 5% reduction from the same quarter in the previous year. I don't know where you're getting the 24% reduction from. Maybe there's a statistic you could share with us?
Well, they made this a part of their report for they issued a report for the entire 2024, and this 24% that I've highlighted is for Q4 of 2024.
Okay, what we saw from the Zambia police statement was that the cases in quarter four of 2024 compared to 2024 actually reduced by 5%. But and again on an annual basis there was a reduction. That is a good sign. But what was sad about it was that in terms of comparing the quarters across the whole year of 2024, the cases increased actually in the fourth quarter. So while we might see an overall reduction in the numbers, the fact that the fourth quarter had an increase means that whatever gains we made earlier in the year, we may be losing them. And it's also particularly sad that we saw this increase in the quarter where we had the 16 days of activism against GBV. And if I recall, there were a lot of horrendous stories around gender-based violence that were reported in that particular quarter. So even with the reduced numbers, the numbers remain high, and we would like to continue to call upon all stakeholders, including ourselves, really, to work together in a concerted manner to ensure that we address gender-based violence and reduce the incidences of gender-based violence. It is something that affects women more than men. Usually, women are affected about 77% more in terms of the full numbers. And when you look at girls, you find that girls will be also affected more than boys when it comes to even if we look at defilement of children. So yes, it's good to see a reduction, but again, in that quarter, the numbers went up. On an annual-to-annual basis, there was a reduction. But then again, this reduction, we always give this rider as NGOCC. Reductions could be because cases are actually going down, and because we are seeing more people going through the justice system and being handed down reasonably good sentences, sometimes maximum allowable sentences. That could be a deterrent. But cases may also go down because sometimes when they're reported, people are forced to withdraw cases for several reasons, including families, pressure, community pressure, and sometimes even just the fear of going through a court case, the exposure and all that publicity, and even the time it takes sometimes, which becomes quite expensive for the victim. So we need a proper study to show us why cases are decreasing, if they're staying the same, what are the factors. Without that, we have anecdotal evidence that would suggest that maybe, the law is taking effect and people are getting scared, or maybe people are not reporting anymore. And then we also know that of the cases that are reported, not all of them are concluded for the same reason. People withdraw cases. So there are a number of factors, but all we want to see is the numbers reduce, and reduce in real terms, not just in reporting, but in real terms.
Do you think then that this makes these reports by the Zambia police useless? That, if we say that the numbers have reduced, it's probably because the numbers have reduced because people are not reporting. And that means that gender-based violence is on the rise, but people are not reporting. Could it be that as well?
I would say that the reports are very, very useful because they help us even to analyze trends. So, I mean, because now we're even seeing that some of these cases are becoming more violent than they were. We are seeing, through some details around, the actual types of violence that are happening. So the reporting by Zambia Police is actually very commendable, and it is not useless. Very, very useful in us analyzing these cases, and it still does give us the knowledge that these things are happening, and some sense of the scale at which they're happening. However, as I said, it would be good for academicians and maybe ourselves as NGOCC just to do some in-depth studies, just to understand some of these drivers and how we can mitigate and ensure that we're not seeing these cases rise. But the reporting by the police is very, very useful, and I would urge them to continue because it gives us a trend analysis, and it always reminds us that these things are still with us and are happening. So I think it's a good thing.
Thank you so much for talking to us on this edition of This Day.
Thank you very much for inviting me.